You're listening to Kate Palmer from SparkleTart.com.
Today I'm going to show you how to watercolour with sparkly paints.
I have this wonderful Sweet Pea Stamps image drawn by Norma Burnell.
This one's called Sapphire, and I'm going to colour it using magical micas. Now this will give a soft watercolour effect with shimmer.
And I'm going to walk you through how I've coloured this using magicals and give you a few tips and tricks to make this whole process easier and to make sure you get wonderful results from the very first time you try it for yourself. To colour this image, you'll only need a very small amount of paint mixed up, so I prefer to work from a small palette. I add a little bit of water to each of the wells in the palette, and then to this I add a little of the magical colours that I'm using, and then I use an old paintbrush to mix them up until it's the right consistency. You'll need to make sure you've used a waterproof ink to stamp your image, otherwise adding water over the top will make it run. So double check on your packet and make sure you're using a waterproof ink to stamp with. With this you'll need to work on one colour at a time and then leave it to dry before continuing on. Otherwise the colours bleed into each other and you end up with a bit of a mess. Now the skin's the largest area, so I'm going to start with that. I'll be using Cocklebells Coral for my darkest areas on the skin, and I'll be using the Cosmopolitan Pink for the paler areas. I'll be using the same technique to add the paint in all the areas here. Basically, you dip your brush into your darkest colour and add this to the darkest areas onto dry paper. This will make the colour take as much as it possibly can. I then add a little bit of water where I've created an edge, and then I start adding the lightest colour over that water and then into the rest of the dry paper. This aids in blending the darker colour and the lighter colour and creating a bit of variation, in this case for skin tone. You need to know that if the paper has been wet first, the colour will be a little bit lighter and will blend, it's a bit more fluid. When you're adding the colour to dry paper, you have to work a little bit harder to get it to blend, and you can end up with hard edges. So it depends on how confident you are and what kind of a look you're going for. If this is your first time, try wetting just that little bit that you're working on with some clean water on the tip of your brush first, and that will make blending a little bit easier.
So I'm just adding it in the vaguest areas where there might be sort of darker skin or shadow. And again rinsing it out in the clean water. And then just adding a little bit of that clean water to assist those two colours in blending so that there's not a real harsh line.
Then what I like to do is use my darkest colour, which is Cocklebells Coral. I'll go back over and add a little bit more of the darker colour to build up the shadows. Now you'll notice I'm just working on one section at a time with one or two colours, both very similar to each other, and making sure I don't touch any of the other areas and get them wet. It's very easy to get your colours to bleed accidentally. I'm also cleaning my brush every time I change a colour. I've got a little bottle, a little bucket of clear, clean water, and I'm constantly dipping my brush in there. You'll also need to give the magicals a little stir each time you use them, because the mica is heavier than the water and it sort of sinks to the bottom. So giving it a little stir just means that you get a little bit of sparkle every time you dip your brush in. Now I'd like to give the face a little bit more definition, so what I'm doing is using that darkest colour onto dry paper. I'm adding in sort of the contours of the face, the cheeks, the chin, the shadows around the eyes. So this will be my base layer. I'm then going to go back over, and with my paler colour I will add basically an even colour all across the top. This will go across the dark and the light, and it will help soften that base layer, but you'll still get a little of that definition peeking through. Now what you'll find is it's very easy at this point to overcolour the face. So another neat technique that you can use, add a little bit of water to the areas where you'd like to lighten the dye colour, and then blot this off with a paper towel, and it will actually reduce the strength of the dye, so you'll get a paler colour. You can also achieve the same lightening effect by dipping your brush in water, going back and using the brush to remove a little of the dye colour from the image, cleaning off your brush again, and just repeating this process until it's the lightness or the depth of colour that you like. This is what I'm doing here. You can see it rather wets the image, so you need to be a bit careful there. While this is drying, I'm going back with my darkest colour and just adding a little bit more colour to those shadows on the arm. I'm also making sure that I'm adding a little bit more shimmer to the image, so it's really got some pop. Now you can see here that shimmer is just almost glowing. It really adds something special to your image. Now I won't bore you to death by showing you every little part of this as I paint it. Basically I'm using that same technique. For the little bird or seahorse bird thingy, I'm using that water technique, so adding water to assist blending those two colours together. Now this works just as well with two completely different colours like purple and green as it does with two similar colours like the peach and the coral. The water is a wonderful blending tool for use with these magicals. Now what I'm doing here is I'm just using a damp brush to pick up the colours. Then I'm continuing to use the same brush without dipping it back into the little well until it runs dry. And by doing this you get quite a large variation in tones and shades just by using that one colour. So basically what I'm going to be doing with the green and then the purple is dipping my brush in and then using it until it's almost dry, just to get a variety of different colours just from using that one colour in a little pot. It just means you don't need to mix up so many colours so you don't waste as much. It also means that your colours will match because it's all based on the same colour really. So you don't have to worry about sort of if one colour is going to clash with another or different colours of sparkles. It just works.
So far this is where I am. You can see how gorgeous and shimmery that all is. Yum yum. So much beautiful shimmer.
Now you may have noticed that I'm using a small paintbrush for all of the work on this piece. I find that a water brush puts out way too much liquid and it doesn't allow you to get the fine detail that's required in images like this. So I prefer a fine detail paintbrush for this kind of work.
I'm almost finished adding colour just here, but I've still got this surround to go. Now what I'm going to do is add some of the Creme Brulee Cream to the French Lilac Violet. Now it needs to be a good amount so that it will change the colour.
So I coloured a test patch with the colours that I'd mixed up and they were still far too dark. So I've used quite a bit of them on another project, and with what I have left I've added quite a bit of water, so it's a very watery, watered down mix, so it's much paler than the originals. I'm applying some of the watered down My Mojito Green to the edges just to give them a little bit of colour, and then I'm going to use the
very watery version of French Lilac mixed with Creme Brulee Cream. I'm just going to make a very pale purple. I'm just going to go over the edges with this, and I'm even mixing it into that green a bit.
Now what I've achieved by mixing the Creme Brulee with the French Lilac is a coordinating colour that's a lot paler.
But one that is sufficiently different from the colours I've used so that they still stand out. Now I'm making sure I go over that green with envy with some of this purple. And for this I'm actually using that fine angular brush. I'm working quite quickly so I don't get any edges. And I've also allowed the insides to dry already. That way I'm not going to get any bleeding of the colours. Now I'm going to need a bit of darker colour here, so I'm mixing some of my original French Lilac Violet just to go over the edges, help soften that green, and then blending out with much paler combination. Alright, so that's the magicals done, and then I'll add some pencil work. So you can see that beautiful shimmer here, and you can also see the green when you've added the purple around the outside here. You've got this beautiful darker shadowed effect. Now while this is wet, I'm just going to add a bit more of that green so that it bleeds, to really help make that background a bit more unified. I'm just going to touch it around some of the edges here. Don't want it to take over, I just want to add a bit more in there. And then with a clean brush, I'm just going to go over that with water. Again, that will help those colours soften and bleed into each other.
And then, so I don't end up with watermarks, I'm going to take that clean water and just apply that right up to the edge of my image so that it recovers the background, so I don't end up with any sort of drying marks.
And this is how I've finished off my card. So I've made sure that the image is the absolute focus. I've surrounded it with very similar colours, and the way I've done this is by using the very same product but on different surfaces. So here I've applied it in a different way to make a background so that it matches the image still. I've used the same colours on the flowers and the leaf garland surrounding, just so that the entire card coordinates. So when you get in close and look, you can see that the flowers coordinate. These are a bit more purple in real life, I don't know why, but they turn out quite blue on camera. You can see that the background here is also shimmery, and I've used the same colours here as I have in the image. The little flowers at the bottom, again, just all using varying techniques and different ways of applying the product so that there's a little bit of variation. I finished it off with one of these little wooden words and some of the gala glitz.
But I think we can all agree that the real stunning component of this card is that amazing image, Sapphire, from Norma J. Burnell from Sweet Pea Stamps. This is just the most gorgeous image to work with. I've gone over with a few coloured pencils, but you can still see that gorgeous, gorgeous shimmer. The pencils have just added a little bit of creaminess and definition to the skin, and I've only used them on the face. So all of that shading on the arms and the rest of the hair and the bird is all achieved from the magicals. The pencils have just added a little bit of creaminess on the face.
But I really like the way that the Prismacolor pencils layer over the top of the magicals. You can get some really wonderful effects. And of course that background that was created with a lot more water than the rest of the image is really subtle and gorgeous. So that's how I have finished my card.
I hope you've enjoyed watching this process, and it might give you a few ideas about using these gorgeous sparkly paints on your next project. Thanks so much for watching, and have a wonderful day. Bye.